Welcome everyone. My name is Chris Machut. I am the CEO and founder at Nataris. Today I'm going to be going over a case study that we did about 4 or 5 months ago, where we increased intermodal yard visibility using Inexpensive OCR. And I'll get a little bit more into the details of what that means. A little bit of background on me. I'm a computer engineer from Virginia Tech. I love technology, love business, been a serial entrepreneur. Our company designs and manufactures camera systems for heavy equipment and material handling equipment. And over the last couple of years, we've developed and added AI into these cameras to aid operators in the business so they can see their operations when they're in the blind. Go ahead and jump into this. Each of you all have different businesses that you operate and have different challenges that you run into day to day. What would it do to your business when it comes to the intermodal side if you're able to decrease turn times, reduce time with your yard checks, and even bring more time back into your admin teams? This includes everyone from dispatching to operations. What would that do to your organization? With a focus today on people. I'll be using a lot of technical terms throughout this case study and this presentation, and it all comes down to the people, and we'll talk about how that impacts them. Let's get into it. So this particular case study uses our SiteTrack's Optical Character Recognition technology to improve the operations and productivity, even the morale of this 3PL, and using this tech. There is a whole bunch of alphabet soup in here that I'll be dropping from time to time. But the key to remember at the end of the day, what we're doing is we're capturing data with a smart device in this company's yard, and we're representing it in a map interface. So if you guys are probably very familiar with platforms such as Google Maps, that's what we're providing at the end of the day, the end result of collecting that data. Some of the more interesting acronyms I may use inside this presentation include OCR, which stands for Optical Character Recognition, OD, which stands for Object Detection, ML, which means Machine Learning, and we'll refer to the broad set of your favorite transportation management systems, container management systems, even transportation management systems as ERP or ERP resource planning platforms. And finally, all of this, if you hear me use the term AI, refers to artificial intelligence and electronic logging devices. Let's jump into it. Our customer, called STI for short, another acronym, excuse me on that, located on the East Coast in Chesapeake, Virginia. They have approximately 16 acres of drayage yard, warehouses, and facilities across 4 separate yards. 2019, this was taken from a satellite view using Google Earth. You'll see all the containers lined up. There's a number of little spaces in there. You note here on the 2019. 2021, the entire supply chain saw this happen. Let me show you again. 2019, 2021. Any of you have worked with intermodal containers in a yard that's been jammed that packed with intermodal containers? It can be quite a challenge. What we effectively did is we went in 2019 from here to here, which we doubled the capacity, or we crammed 100 more containers into this small representation of their yard. What did that do to their business? Trucks couldn't maneuver, couldn't get around the yard to actually get into the containers, or they had to have other trucks in, switcher trucks to alternate the flow. Containers were lost. When you stack them in that tight in so many locations, 2, 3 deep, it's hard to find them. Drivers were frustrated. There's owner-operators out there going into a 3PL's yard and you see your containers 2 back and you can't get to it. Quite frustrating. Slow reconciliation of the actual loads themselves from beginning to end. Even their yard checks were obscenely long and would take 3 to 4 hours. You can imagine doing a yard check taking 3 to 4 hours. That 3 to 4 hours has already gone by all that data is now old. At the end of the day, they were getting garbage in, another acronym, getting garbage out. So how do we take all of these challenges and create a solution that STI deployed in their facilities to make their operations work better? It all started with solid data source. That's what it comes down to. If you start any sort of optical character recognition project or any sort of tasking, start with a firm foundation in good, solid, reliable data. In this particular case, we used a cell phone. They also tied in their tablets. They actually happen to have their container and yard management system, which I'll show here in a few minutes, that they can actually view in a tablet as well, too. They used the cell phones and their tablets with a nice little mount on the dashboard to scan their yard daily and identify those assets that are in their yard. And at the end of the day, there's not always coverage, cellular internet coverage, to get that data pushed up to the cloud. Wasn't a problem. When they were done, they basically just uploaded it over Wi-Fi. Here's a short video. I'm not sure if it will play. Mario, if I hit play. Ah, there we go. This is how the AI actually identifies each of the assets. And I'll call it out here really quick for you. The artificial intelligence is doing object detection first on the containers themselves. And you'll see it in this box denoted by 0.95. Then it looks, the object detection algorithm goes in and it looks to where is, this must be an international intermodal container, where is that ID? It then pulls the ID from that container. You also then, in this particular AI algorithm, what it's also trying to identify is the chassis below. The chassis is first identified as an object with the OD algorithm, and then the optical character recognition algorithm keys in on the actual chassis ID. For this particular customer, they were purely interested in the containers themselves because they're just a 3PL. And that 3PL, they cared about what was in it, getting things loaded, unloaded, and back out the door. So when we have garbage in, garbage out, we have a good, solid foundation to go from. All starts with optical character recognition and asset tracking, and tying that into when they're taking their cell phone or their tablet and scanning the yard, correlating that with the GPS coordinates every single time that object is identified. So every time the object detection algorithm goes, hey, that's a container, it goes, all right, I'm marking it based on my GPS coordinates that I've identified that asset. And finally, that data can then be taken and represented in such a way of, instead of auditing the data, I had a friend of mine give me a really, really good line of feedback. The industry overall tends to just audit the data constantly. We're always trying to figure out what comes next. The right dashboard, the right interface that can not only ingest the optical character recognition of the IDs on the containers is not only important, but also being able to visualize it. And even tie in other systems such as RFID tags or even your GPS pucks. Having a single interface that you can view all the pins, all the locations of all your assets. It doesn't matter if it's captured through optical character recognition or other technologies. Having a cohesive framework is really important. And that's what we're able to accomplish for STI, using the yard spot interface. Ultimately, what this led to was decreased truck turn times. These owner-operators, a 3PL's best customer is actually the 3PL working for them. You want to take care, as a 3PL, you want to take care of your other owner-operators that come into your facility. It used to take them about an hour to turn a load. After they were able to simply start identifying where all their assets were, they could tell that owner-operator, oh, it's in the back 9, or however their terminology was at their particular facility, reducing it from 1 hour down to 10 minutes for that truck driver. That's huge. The yard checks went from 3 to 4 hours that I mentioned in the beginning of the presentation down to 30 minutes. That's impactful, especially for some of these facilities where you actually have the site superintendent or the site supervisor doing the yard check. This was the unintended consequence. By the fact that they knew where all their assets were, and the fact that they could do the yard checks faster. The dispatch team, the operations staff, administration, were not having to hunt down assets they didn't know where they were located. It put 3 hours back into the back office's staff. How much impact could that do to your organization? And finally, gave a 100% common operating picture for the front of the house and the back of the house. Customers interacting with the 3PL and back office and those actually in the yard. So what are some of the best practices for leveraging different and various OCR technologies? First, it's extremely important to use a camera that is of quality imagery. If anybody remembers Android 3, Android 4, Android 5, I think we're in the Android 1000 right now. Don't know the exact number. Actually, I think it's 13. The quality of your camera is everything. If your eyes can't see the ID after you scan with any OCR system, the computer can't see it. So we've had people that will drive by their yards at 35 miles an hour. Kind of say, well, could you see that ID as the container flew by, as you flew by the container? Oh no, slow down a little bit for the OCR. And that's also a lot of times, if you've ever seen these big enterprise gates, they have a nice stop sign right in front of the enterprise gate with all the cameras. It gives the AI some time to read and analyze what's going on. Going back to speed that I mentioned there a minute ago, it's very important to, at least with our software, 10 miles an hour, good speed, 12 miles an hour with the app, run through the yard. It's a very safe speed for a yard anyways. Next, using Wi-Fi to increase the reliability. And this kind of ties into my next bullet point too as well. They would run through the yard and they were trying to upload it over a very bad cellular connection, this particular yard. And they were having challenges of after they'd scan, pushing it up to the cloud. Well, the solution was use the office Wi-Fi. So you take care of your electronics. Use the office Wi-Fi, you do the scan of the yard, mount it on a nice hands-free mount, go back into the office, plug it into the power and recharge your phone, and while it's recharging, it can upload the data to the cloud for the AI to process it. There are many areas of integrating OCR technologies that can lead to positive disruption and change for an organization. It all comes down to the organization, understanding how to use the data, and then where that data is ultimately going to go. It's not just asset tracking. We've learned over the last year, since we presented last year, even with our existing customers, of all the different ways, once they knew where their assets are, what could they actually do with them? If you think about your organization, or if you work with another organization, what kinds of challenges do they encounter and potentially need to overcome to make better decisions about their business? One as such is maintenance tracking. The ability to actually identify an asset that potentially can't be read. And this is oftentimes extremely useful, not just on the containers, but potentially on the chassis themselves. If you can't read the ID on it, maybe it needs some maintenance on it. Next is billing. How long has that container been at that particular location? At that warehouse door, in that drayage yard? Nobody knows. If you have that data to go back on in an actual picture with the ID and a timestamp and a GPS coordinates, what could your organization do to make better decisions to drive revenue? And also save customers money for potentially billing errors or mistakes. It's immutable and it can't be refuted when you have a nice picture of it and a date and timestamp. Inventory control. You want to understand where your inventory resides. How many of these assets do I have in my yard? I don't know. How much more can I actually take on? Is always interesting. The other one was the lot checks. Getting back to the humans in all of this, driving around, it being in a golf cart, a yard hostler, switcher truck, you name it. Is it practical for us human beings to drive around, look at every single container, write it down, transpose characters, when there's a lot of other important things that need to be done. Yard checks need to get done. Let's make it a more pleasurable experience for all those involved. Dispatching. Now dispatching has the ability with this data to make decisions on radioing to the owner-operator when to come by. If they have a ERP system, the Enterprise Resource Planning Interface, can they use that to aid in reporting and having dispatching reporting? Hey, looks like your container just went through this point, or it was scanned at this point in time. It's in yard 3, row 6. Here's a picture. Guy can see a picture of it. You want to get really fancy, you can give him a little pin that he could put in his little Google Maps and drive right to it, and it's right in front of him. Demurrage and dwell time. I mean, you get, this all ties back into your billing and your inventory and your lot checks and everything else. How do we properly account for that? Loading and unloading, your warehouse staff. You have a 3PL that has a warehouse and your staff are in building B, and all of a sudden containers are getting dropped off at building A. That's a fun one. Where do you switch all them? How do you prioritize that? Where do you set them all up? And that ties into the last one, which is your drayage aspect. Understanding if a particular yard is full, if I need to maybe get more space, if we need to anticipate workflows in our yards, we can address all those head on. A last question to you, and we'll go into a brief Q&A here. If you guys have any questions, I'd be happy to go over it. I asked you in the beginning about people and what AI can do with your organization. If you had a good foundation of data in your organization, your customer's organization, how can they make better, more informed decisions about the employees, the vendors, and your customers to deliver more value? Thank you so much. We are at booth 812. We do have a live demo if you'd like to try out the Optical Character Recognition scanning tech. I have a QR code here. You can go to sitetracks.io/IANA 2022. Special thanks to Service Transfer Inc. for participating in this case study, and YardSpot for providing their interface to actually represent the data to enable STI to make better decisions. Are there any questions? Go ahead, yes. So automated yard check, I'll repeat the question just so everybody can hear it. She asked the question of, can you explain a little bit more how an automated yard check would work with an OCR-based system to identify the assets? So basically the workflow is fairly straightforward. So in traditional yard checks, you have a guide, either with Post-it notes, spreadsheet, something that he's gonna radio or communicate back. That all goes away. What they, with STI, they actually use tablets, and they would mount it in the window, in the driver's side window, hit a record button, and drive. Drive through the yard. The camera is scanning and running through the yard, and every single container that comes into frame there, and I'll try to get it back to that one slide, every container, as he's driving by, he can actually, as long as the camera can see the AI, or see the container ID, you then have the ability to get the container ID pulled off and then pushed into the cloud. Once it's in the cloud, it then interfaces with the enterprise systems such as YardSpot. So they have the ability to collect it with a camera, push that information, the videos of the actual containers once they've gone through the yard. I'm trying to see where that one video was. Did I pass it again? So if you imagine this sitting, this would be in like the passenger window. So if I'm driving along, I have a camera here, I'm going past all the containers. I'm identifying each container as I go along, recording a video. You actually record it. It's on the device itself, it's a dumb app, for lack of a better term. There's no intelligence in it. Once it's done recording it, all of that video is pushed up to the cloud, analyzed, such as the object detection running on the container, the object detection running on the chassis, identifying that ID, and then pushing that, in this case, into any ERP system such as YardSpot. Yes, sir. I'll come to you. So the question was, in case the containers are actually stacked. So on all these containers are on chassis. If the containers are stacked, how does the AI identify it? We're currently in the process of incorporating that into our environment, but the same system, it works the same way. The OCR, or the object detection algorithm, identifies the first container, and it would identify, humor me here, you don't usually have a container on a chassis on another container, but if there was another container here with no chassis and this was on the ground, it would identify another object right here. Once that object's identified, it knows where to look for the ID that it wants to pull off the container and pushes that into the ERP environment. Thank you, sir, for the question. Were there any other questions? Yes, sir. Just setups like this right now, we are working on, so the machine learning algorithm, his question is, are we doing the technology with stack containers or just with mounted chassis? So containers, or with chassis with containers on them. Currently the tech is purely with the chassis and the containers themselves. We are working on the machine learning, or the ML side of it, of training the ability for the AI to know, oh, I can actually do a container on top of this container, but I would never have, correct me if I'm wrong, I haven't seen it yet. I saw vertical chassis here in Long Beach, by the way, mounted vertically. That was impressive. Having a stack container on top of a container, we have to teach the algorithms to say, yes, that is a valid object, and then we pull the ID off. So it's just a matter of training, collecting the information, and telling. You treat AI like an infant. It doesn't know initially what it's looking at. Once it learns more and more, it understands, it can better respond, and then deliver you the results once it gets trained. You put it in school, for lack of a better term. Thank you for the question. Were there any others? Yes, sir. Yeah.
How accurate can the GPS in a small yard tell you exactly where that box is? You know what I mean?
How accurate can the GPS in a small yard actually tell you where this particular box is? So I'd say if this was the cell phone and I'm scanning that container from about this distance, what we're doing right here is the GPS is inside the phone. The GPS is not on the intermodal container. What we're telling the back end is, we caught this container with this phone, this was the app running, capturing that ID, at this particular location. So the optimal distance is typically 15 to 20 feet away. You're going to get 15 to 20 feet accuracy of the GPS location of each of those containers, which for a 20, 40 foot containers, pretty good. The other limitation with GPS though, and this is restrictions with our government, is they do not allow usually anything more precise than a couple feet anyways. And with assets this large, works pretty well. Thank you. Were there any other questions? So he brought up an excellent one. So this was about extreme climates. How does the AI handle wind, dust storms, snow, rain, environments that you can't see? What it goes back to 100% is, if you cannot see it, fog, the AI can't see it. So as long as your eyes can look out that window, so and I think everyone's experienced this with windows, if your window's fogged up and you have the camera inside the window, the camera's not gonna see it. If you have the camera outside and there's rain on the lens and the lens is not properly cleaned, or there's mud on the lens, that's one of my favorite. If you have mud on the lens and the camera can't see it, it's not gonna pick it up. So the environmental conditions just have to be addressed based off of what you're trying to see and how you're trying to see it. If your eyes can see it, the OCR system should be able to detect it too. How are we on time, Mario? Another question, sir?
Can they manually correct it from inside the office? If they look on their computer screen and see that, can they go in and says, no, that's not AP, it's an AZ?
Can they manually, so that's a good question. So can this data be manually updated based off of what is actually identified off of an asset? So a real common thing, us humans do it too, a 2 or a Z, a 0 and an O. If somebody literally put chalk on, for instance, the chassis, which has been known to happen sometimes, is that an O or a 0? Can that information be updated or reported or the model trained? Yes. With our OCR tech, we have the ability to report errors, whatever those errors may be. It could be handwriting, it could be stenciling, it could be the font. We have that capability to report the mechanism. At the end of the day, what you want to have as well is a good, robust interface to manage that data too. So your interface at the end of the day, be it YardSpot or any other ERP in an environment, you want to make sure that you have the ability to provide feedback to them in the event that the data, maybe from the GPS puck, is no longer reporting anymore, or the OCR is not right because the font changed. Because some fonts can look like an O or a 0. Thank you for the question. Well, I think we've gotten to the half-hour mark. I appreciate everyone participating. I hope you guys all enjoy the rest of the show here, and we'll start the next section here in about 5 to 10 minutes.